Sarah Gloss Podcast. Check it out. The Sarah Gloss Experience.
Hello. I hope you've all had a wonderful holiday season, and welcome back to the second part of Season 1 of A Bro's Guide to Glitter. Our first episode of 2022 will be talking about RomComs. We're going to be talking about the different eras of RomComs, their tropes, and how they've affected our outlooks on love and relationships. But before we dive in, I'd like to introduce you to our guest. He's actually watched more rom-coms than I have and is always one to stay on top of trends for what's popular on Netflix. We met in high school marching band, and he recently graduated from Purdue University with a degree in industrial engineering. He's currently living outside of Atlanta, Georgia, living his best manufacturing town life. It is John Patrick Scanlon.
Hello. Thanks for having
Welcome to
me.
the show. Now, right now, you are in Georgia, where it's snowing.
Yeah, it's weird. I am not leaving the house today. The last time this happened, the city was shut down for a week. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna stick to the house today.
Oh, I didn't know it shut down last time.
Yeah, it was chaos.
Well, so rom-coms. How would you define them? Like, what's the difference between rom-coms and stories with just romantic comedic elements?
I think the rom-com is it's more formulaic to it, to a degree, where you have the initial they meet type thing. The relationship builds to the point where it's like, hey, this is romantic, and then some event happens where obviously they split apart, but then they both realize in the end of the day that they're meant for each other type thing. They come back together afterwards, and it's all happily ever after. And as opposed to like a romance movie, it might just be there's no event, like a schism, I guess is a word for it maybe, where there's an issue in the relationship. Like some romantic movies would just be smooth sailing, as opposed to the rom-com obviously it needs that twist, and then everything works out, is essentially how I define it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good rule of thumb, because definitely as I was doing the research for this episode and was trying to think, is this a rom-com? Is this a rom-com? And I was running into the problem of kind of everything is a rom-com. And one of the movies that kind of came up for debate with me was The Princess Diaries with Anne Hathaway, where it makes sense that it would be a rom-com, because what other movie would it fall under? But also the main plot line isn't her and Chris Pine, it's her being a princess. And so when she and Chris Pine kind of have their falling out mid-movie, it's not so much as formulaic to the formula you're talking about, but just as part of the movie with her objective to become queen. So, yeah, crazy.
I'm sure it's pretty broad too. Obviously, I don't think genres can be they're meant to be broad, and I'm sure they can probably be defined. You can definitely say confidently none of the Marvel movies are rom-coms, but it's really broad, and it's probably just, it kind of comes down to you can probably classify most romance movies as rom-coms, just because there's comedic elements to it, lighthearted elements to it. And most rom-coms are, let's be honest, barely comedies. It's not a comedy in the traditional sense, at least.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because I do feel to go back to my earlier example, Princess Diaries is very comedic, whereas something like Pretty Woman is really more heavily romantic than comedic.
Yeah, especially in the example of Pretty Woman, the only thing maybe comedic about it was the when she gets denied at the store is the only thing maybe you could see as comedy in that movie, whereas otherwise it's just kind of a building a relationship type thing, rather than there's very little comedic anything in that movie.
Yeah, And certainly a lot of the comedic elements in rom-coms, I think, are like about the formulaic nature of the movies themselves. Like the fact that, and we'll talk about this more in the tropes section, but like the idea that like certain things are a little too contrived or a little too corny or a little too, you know, convenient. And that's where, you know, we laugh, oh, ha, 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 you know.
Right. Yeah.
So, that being said, what is your favorite rom-com and why?
It's between three for me. So, Sleeping with Other People, The Escort, and then the last one. It escapes me. Oh, Two Night Stand. Is what it's
I don't
called.
think I've seen any of those.
Yeah. So, Sleeping with Other People is like, it's pretty. I don't know if it's super well known, but that one was like pretty classic rom-com. Like just follows the formula to the T. But it was solid and. Overall, I think I like rom-coms that are rewatchable. Like, you're not like bored. I guess I don't know. In a way, not bored. I guess it's enjoyable every time you watch it type thing, as opposed to you dread watching it again. The Escort is like it's like a modern day version of Pretty Woman. That one was a little obscure. I caught it when it was on Prime. Amazon Prime for a while, and it was like some Sundance film that didn't do super well, but I thought it was pretty solid. It's basically the modern day equivalent of like a Pretty Woman type movie. And then Two Night Stand is it had Miles Teller in it, and they're just a blizzard hits during like a Tinder hookup, and so they're stuck in an apartment together, and it was just kind of interesting to see, like, you know. It was different, I guess, than what you're used to in terms of, it was very, timeline-wise, it was short-term. Obviously, it was only one night, but it was, or I guess 2 nights technically, but it was just different, and I like Miles Teller as an actor, so it was, top 3, I guess.
Interesting. Yeah, Miles Teller, he's a cool guy. He was also in 500 Days of Summer, which is not something I have seen, but another rom-com that like a lot of people talk about with Zooey Deschanel. My kind of rom-com, what I've seen mainly like 90s movies, and I think that's because, you know, my mom was a young lady in the 90s. She gave birth to me in 2000 when she was 35, so she would have been 25 in 1990. So, you know, she's been trying to like constantly expose me to obviously what she liked as a young woman. So I think that I'm trying to like decide what my favorite rom-com is. It's kind of the two that I watch over and over and over again that, like you say, it's rewatchable. I love to watch it again. Are Ever After with Drew Barrymore and Bridget Jones' Diary with Renee Zellweger and Colin Firth and Hugh Grant. And also, like, Bridget Jones' Diary, here's, like, why I can't decide between the two. Because, obviously, Ever After is, I love Drew Barrymore. I really, like, see elements of myself in her. But, admittedly, it's, like, a retelling of Cinderella. So it's not, you know, it kind of has, like, a period piece effect to it that kind of pulls it out of, you know, the most other rom-coms in its category. And Bridget Jones' Diary is actually a modern-day retelling of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, which, like, I love. An amazing rom-com. But, you know, there's some things about, like, Bridget Jones as a character that it's like, you know, oh, are we really shaming women for this? You know.
Right, and that was also the 90s, so I'm sure that like a lot of the standards of what we deem normal now have changed for the better.
Yeah, definitely. Because certainly, you know, one of the things about Bridget Jones, just to like let the listeners in, is that like constantly throughout the movie, she's like trying to lose weight. And first off, Renee Zellweger is like a very beautiful woman. But her weight throughout the movie is like my weight. like my weight now as I'm a healthy person, you know, and obviously that isn't to say that, like, you know, that isn't to say anything other than just, like, you know, the number of weight is arbitrary to, you know, each person has their own, like, individual style, and to, like, put a number on beauty is, like, bleh. And so that's just, like, something that's, like, misogynist and not great to have in a movie. But, you know, new rom-com movies are trying to, you know, break out of the way that, like, those older movies perpetuated bad standards of beauty. And so then, you know, we'll talk about those eras. But before we get into that, let's play a word association game. Huh, Scanlon?
Let's do it.
All right, so I am going to put 15 seconds on the clock, and in those 15 seconds, you're going to say every word that comes into your mind when you think of rom-coms. Are you ready?
Sure, let's go.
All right, go.
Movies. Julia Roberts. Jennifer Aniston, Adam Sandler. Yeah. That was pathetic.
Well, you know, you named, like, the big actors, so there you go.
I think that kind of transitions into the periodization of it. Is I think it's defined by the kind of the big actresses and actors in those periods.
I think so as well. Because even with movies that take place in the 2000s but have 90s rom-com stars, I think of as 90s rom-coms. So let's get into it. And if we think about it, romantic comedies have existed for hundreds of years. There's Shakespearean works like As You Like It and A Midsummer Night's Dream. There's Jane Austen's work with Pride and Prejudice and Emma. There's even the well-made plays in 19th century France like Eugene Scrib's Glass of Water. And, you know, there's plenty of Audrey Hepburn romantic comedies in the 1950s. But when we in 2022 use the word rom-com, we're often thinking about a very specific type of movie that follows a very specific formula. And a lot of those movies, we think of the pinnacle being the 90s rom-coms, the 2000 rom-coms, to the Hallmark Christmas movies, and now these new Netflix rom-coms. So let's talk about 90s rom-coms. As we were saying, you know, this is a lot defined by the actors. So, Scanlon, who do you think of as 90s rom-com actors?
I mean, the first name that comes to mind is probably Julia Roberts. She has so many rom-coms from the 90s.
She had Pretty Woman, she had My Best Friend's Wedding, she had Runaway Bride. I'm sure there were more.
Yeah, there's a lot more probably. Clueless is obviously from the 90s.
Alicia Silverstone.
I think that kind of... Yeah, I don't know. I think it was defined really by that, and just... I think rom-coms tend to reflect, obviously, the era they were made in, because of, like, you know, you can't predict the future. So, and no one wants to make, like, a 30s rom-com in the year 1990. So, I'm sure you can kind of... Obviously, the film quality defines it, too. But I think you can kind of tell based on kind of... Culturally, the 90s were different than the 2000s, and then the obviously the 2010s and all that, just based on economic factors and everything else, just kind of the world around them. So, I'd say,
Well,
oh gosh.
And certainly even in Big with Tom Hanks, another two people who I thought of in my brain, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, who were both in Sleepless in Seattle, and I think it was You've Got Mail. I haven't seen You've Got Mail. Or maybe it was When Harry Met Sally. I don't remember. But in Tom Hanks' movie Big, it's like everything that happens to him where he goes from being a little kid to an adult would be solved in the year of modern technology with, like, the iPhone and stuff.
Right. So, I mean, obviously, certain rom-coms wouldn't work if they were set today. But I think looking back on them, that's kind of it slightly has that nostalgia factor. And I think that just in general, it's just again, it's the like I think it's truly defined by like the actors and the actresses. I think more so the actresses, especially back then, because at least a lot of the male stars are, and maybe that's just because I'm a guy and a straight guy, so maybe that's more what I pay attention to. But it felt like it was more recurringly you'd see the same actress in multiple rom-coms rather than the same male love interest in rom-coms, and at least in the 90s. And so I think that's what really defined that era, was like those big actresses when they were still young, and not to say age is bad, but people like Julia Roberts, like Drew Barrymore, like I can't really think of another name off the top of my head, but I think that's what really defined the 90s, was that. And I don't know, I haven't seen too many 90s rom-coms because I guess one thing that, when we get to the Netflix one, that the one thing that makes those big is accessibility, as far as like, obviously most people these days have like Netflix, Amazon Prime, potentially Disney Plus, kind of the streaming services. And so really it comes down to what's on there is kind of what I watch. So obviously they rotate, but oftentimes it's not 90s related or 90s movies. So when they pop up, I'll watch them. But I think that the issue being is obviously that was 30 years ago, and certain things haven't aged as well. And like certain plots just can't. I think that one big thing about rom-coms is their relatability, and certain plots you just can't relate to anymore, and it just kind of it feels sluggish. So maybe like latter 90s, more into the 2000s could, and like that's kind of where the transition, obviously the transition into the more 2000s based ones comes. But yeah, I don't know. 90s ones are definitely, in my opinion, defined by the actresses that were in them.
Yeah, certainly 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. And that's one that a lot of people were like, oh my God, I love 50 First Dates. 50 First Dates is so good. And like that was in 2004. And 50 First Dates is so good. But like Rob Schneider's portrayal as a native Hawaiian man is like, oh man, this, this dates the movie. Sadly dates it by, 2 decades, which is still too soon. But yeah, everything you're saying about like, telling the time and the era through the movies is definitely present. And that kind of leads us speaking of 50 First Dates, they were, Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore were in Wedding Singer in the 90s. And so even though 50 First Dates is in 2004, that's one that I define as a 90s movie because it's with Adam and Drew.
Yeah, but I see that more as like the transitionary period myself, in terms of like, I think Adam Sandler was huge during the 2000s, especially in like kind of in general, but like Adam Sandler rom-coms are, they lean more towards the comedy side of the rom-com genre, but they tend to be pretty good, and they tend to be pretty watchable. And like again, like and that's one thing that I've noticed, and maybe it's just because I've seen so many Adam Sandler rom-com type movies, but it's consistently him and another actress, and it's typically the same actress, like Jennifer Aniston. I think has done multiple movies with him, and like they actually have like pretty good chemistry, so those movies tend to come out pretty good. And so, yeah, I can definitely see that that's kind of like maybe the transition into the more 2000s, like rom-com.
That's a very good way of putting it. Because certainly I feel like Legally Blonde belongs there. I mean, it feels very like Y2K with like the, glittery pink, ultra feminine. Like, it's giving me Britney Spears era. But it's also, it's Reese Witherspoon, and it feels very 90s more than it feels like it doesn't belong with like Knocked Up or Leap Day or Maid of Honor.
Yeah, I think that the 2000s right there was like, because technology's advancing so rapidly, especially in the early 2000s, I think that it also made it so that our culture also rapidly changed. And so I think those early 2000 movies being so different from like the late 2000s like movies, especially romantic comedies and stuff like that, I think is because the culture shifted so quickly. And so obviously early 2000s would be more like 90s, because I think that like the 90s kind of still prevailed in that early 2000 era. Especially, I'm sure that like the war in Iraq starting in 2001, 9/11, people were looking for a happier time, which would have been the 90s. And I'm sure that that's kind of what was prevalent at the time. And then as you move later and later into the 2000s, things shift. Obviously, we start looking at things like iPhone comes out, and the recession hits, and things like that. And I think that obviously a cultural shift occurred. And so I think that those early 2000s movies they're technically 2000s movies, but they still have that 90s feel to them. And I think that maybe with the advancement of technology, the way we make movies changed, but also just our culture as a society changed to where we moved more and more towards something that seems more familiar to us today in the 2000s.
That's a very good point. I wonder if, let me Google now. I wonder if, like, in any way coincided with the shift from when they started using, like, real film, like REEL film, to digital film. When did Hollywood start using digital? It says Hollywood started to capture films digitally in the 2000s, but it wasn't until 2013 that digitally shot films were more common than celluloid productions. So, this idea of, and I don't know what that means for, like, specifically rom-coms, but, and what that means for, just, like, the picture, like, the quality of the image on screen, or, like, the speed of production. I've forgotten kind of, like, the difference, but this idea of technological shift is, I think you're right about that. I think you're right.
And I think that also the 2000s was also an era where we saw a lot more like Disney original movies was like kind of the highlight of the 2000s. I was a kid, so in my highlight of the 2000s, but so like things like technically you'd call High School Musical a rom-com theoretically. And like I'm sure there's quite a few Disney movies that are like that, but I think that a lot of them were starting to be, especially towards the back half of the 2000s, were starting to be slated more towards the television audience, where you could throw it on TV, make it like a 2-hour special, and throw a half-hour of ad breaks dispersed in between, or relative to that. And I think that's like the length of the rom-coms sort of turned into that hour and a half thing, whereas before it might have been longer, or probably not shorter, but probably longer. Just because I think that a lot of the time, what makes rom-coms easy to watch and why they were putting them on TV was, realistically speaking, if you missed 10 minutes of a rom-com, you could probably figure out what happened plot-wise. You're not missing much, right? Whereas, so it was super easy to just slap on a television with some ads in between, and if someone walked away from the screen for 10 minutes or whatever, they didn't miss much. And then on top of that, like another reason why things were popping up on TV was people starting to get DVRs. So like TV became more easy, more accessible. You didn't have to go out and buy the DVD anymore, and you didn't have to go out in theaters and watch it. You could just record it on your DVR and watch it again later. So I think like technological shift definitely defined it changed the formula slightly, along with just probably aging in and out of certain actors and actresses, and then just social norms changing. I have Google pulled up myself, looking at some just 2000s rom-coms, and you can kind of see the shift from I think rom-coms got, for lack of a better word, raunchier towards as time progresses.
I agree.
I think that's because as a society we become more and more sex positive, I'd say. In terms of we've been more accepting of it rather than where it might have been taboo beforehand. And so I think that as time progressed, you see more and more rom-coms that are rated higher, and you know what I'm like, PG-13 and R-rated movies as opposed to PG movies. And you'll see more movies that do revolve around that. kind of more about sex and less about just like the characters just having a romance out of nowhere.
Yeah. That's kind of all of those are really good points, because certainly if you think about it, like with the 90s rom-coms, they had to put them out in theaters. They had to make a reason for people to get up on the weekend, leave their house, go to the theater, pay for a ticket, and sit in a theater and eat popcorn, and watch the movie. And that was like their way of getting eyes. And if people didn't like it, they couldn't sell the box office tickets. And it would take months, until they could get it out on DVD or stream it on TV. And that would be dependent probably on how well the box office sales was when it was released. But certainly with, not just with streaming, but even just with like how much bigger and more accessible TV was probably in the 2000s than in the 90s even, you don't necessarily have to put them out on theaters. You can put a movie on like AMC on Friday night, for example, and just be like, yeah, it's straight to TV, and it no longer has to appeal to such a wide audience to get a lot of people to come. There's just going to be eyes already. And so you can even afford to, like you said, it can be raunchier because it no longer has to be something that the kids have to be able to watch in the same room as their parents. Now the parents can just like go off and do their own thing. And even the idea of, like, you said you looked up the 2010s, like just the 2000s rom-coms, and they look raunchier. I also feel like all of their posters just look more boring. Like, Leap Day, it's just kind of like, Amy Adams and who's that other guy? Leap Day, Amy Adams. Like, they're just standing in front of green, So, and I feel like that's a lot of, isn't like Knocked Up the same way? Knocked Up poster. Yeah, Knocked Up, the first poster of like Seth Rogen is just him standing in front of green, and then these secondary ones of him with, what's her name? Isabel Stevens from Grey's Anatomy. It's like very simple. So I think that in the way that they also don't have to have mass appeal, kind of allows them to cut a certain amount of corners where movies like Wedding Singer and Pretty Woman and Sleepless in Seattle had to have like kind of large appeal.
I see what you're saying, for sure. I mean, as far as the movie posters go, like Pretty Woman's was literally just the main actor and actress on the front page, and like.
Oh, that's a good point.
And like, I think that's just kind of the staple of rom-com like poster. It's like a lot of the time you're just watching like, oh, that actress is cool. Oh, that actor's cool. I think on top of that too, though, it's also even you were mentioning obviously from going from film reels to digital, but I think it's also like scripting wise too. We have the internet now, so we can email things, we can collaborate from all over the world. We need less people. Obviously, like processing speeds have increased. Like you're not using a typewriter anymore. You can use a computer. And they had computers back in the 80s and the 90s, but I'm sure that a lot of it does come down to just how easy it is to write these and churn them out. And whereas before, as you were saying, you had to make a really solid movie to put in theaters to get your return on investment. Now it feels like you can kind of just they can be pumped out, and I think plots can be explored more, and just it's easier to produce a movie now than I think it was back then. And I think obviously people's expectations have increased since in terms of like this visual effects and all that kind of stuff. But I think overall, as far as getting a movie from like an idea to a working final script, that process is faster probably. And as you were saying, that things can be more adult now because children don't have to be able to watch every single movie. And so like, whereas like you might think, I'd say maybe Pretty Woman was probably like, I mean, that topic's pretty mature for the age it was made in. That was rated.
Yeah, it's about Julia Roberts as a prostitute,
Yeah,
but
literally.
it doesn't have the cussing and the swear words that, like, what's another movie with a lot of swear words? Like, that probably Knocked Up does.
Yeah. Oh, Pretty Woman was rated R, apparently. I had no idea. Which, I mean, it makes sense for that era, even though, like, obviously the topic's a little mature. Like, he literally picks up a prostitute.
Yeah.
But, apparently, I haven't seen it in forever. I'm just looking at Google here, and it says the reason for the rating is nudity, violence, profanity, drug use, and intense
I remember
scenes.
the drug use. I think I remember the nudity. I don't recall seeing anyone, like, naked, but I think, like, she was in a bathtub or something. Yeah, she was in a bathtub. But, you know, that's really more of a suggestion of nudity, I feel like.
Which back then, I mean, technically Pretty Woman that was the 80s, I thought, like
I think it was, like...
1990, my bad. But still, I mean, that's pretty early in the 90s. So, like, I guess for the time it was a lot, and as I said, like, earlier, like, we've become as a society more sex positive, I think. So, like, obviously, if that film was released today, it would probably be PG-13. But
Yeah, I think so too.
because you can get away with a lot now, I guess. And I think that standardization of, like, because of the internet, standardization of things like that has obviously become more common, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So with these 2000s rom-coms, this is where we are, and how do we move on from this? Now that feels like the blend from 2000 rom-coms, 2010 rom-coms to today. That kind of gets a little fuzzy for me because I feel like even recent movies like Night School in 2018, that gives me very, like, 2010s, you know, like, one of the better 2010s movies vibe. Like, it's kind of on par with, like, Maid of Honor with Patrick Dempsey, maybe. But what complicates this is that in 2010, no, not 2010, 2001, on August 5th, 2001, Hallmark Channel debuted its first Christmas rom-com called One Christmas Eve. So that kind of adds to the, you know, the standardization, the direct-to-TV, the simpler distribution process of rom-coms. And on top of that, they're Christmas rom-coms.
I think that Hallmark movies are kind of their own, like, their own thing. Because that truly embraced the same actresses, the same actors, to the I'm like literally like on the Hallmark movie, back-to-back movies will have the same actress in two random towns in the middle of nowhere, and the plot obviously you can stereotype those down to a T. Hallmark movies just because and they're easy to watch, they sell well, and they're a bit ridiculous, but that's what makes them Hallmark movies, I guess, in terms of, like, they all end the same. They all have the similar plot. It's always, like, the same. But, I mean, Hallmark is both the store and the channel and the whole brand of Hallmark is super romanticized. And, like, so I think that, like, that kind of escapism from the Hallmark channel is where, like, they've gotten it down to an art, a science almost, where it's just they can churn out these movies because the scripts write themselves practically. And then you just end up with the same plot over and over again, slightly modified with, you know, slight location changes, couple personnel changes, and pretty soon you just churned out an entire cinematic universe unintentionally of just romantic comedies.
I did love the TikTok trend this year. It was more of a micro trend of people being like, when you lose everything in the divorce because your big hotshot New York divorce lawyer fell in love with the local carpenter from her hometown.
Yeah, I saw a few of those. Yeah, no, I mean, truly, you never see what's on the other side. That'd be a funny like parody movie type thing. That would be
Oh,
interesting.
yeah.
But yeah, so I think the Hallmark movies are kind of their own offshoot. I don't think it's like the standard romantic comedy, just because they truly do. They stay within themselves, I guess, so to speak. Like those actresses and actors really don't have much mainstream pull. Like they pretty much act exclusively with Hallmark, and so it is. I mean, I'm sure they're making good money, but like it doesn't ring the same way, and they really are just the same plot. And those Hallmark movies, I haven't seen a ton of them, but I'm sure they're. I think those pay more homage to kind of the older romantic comedies where it's like less raunchy, less like about sex, and more child friendly, like PG, maybe PG-13 at the most, type movies.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And I would agree with you on that. I certainly have not. I don't think I've ever seen a Hallmark Christmas movie full. I saw that one rom-com Christmas movie with Queen Latifah, but it was not, I don't think it was Hallmark, because that was actually good. But my mom watches, like, the Hallmark Christmas movies every Christmas. She, like, puts it on, because the same thing you were saying, it's easily digestible, and if she, has to make herself breakfast, if she has to work out, if she has to, like, do something for work, then she looks up, and if she missed 10 minutes, well, she still knows what's happening. But certainly I saw a post on Instagram this year that was like multiple Hallmark Christmas movie posters, and they all pretty much looked the same, where it was like all, a white couple where the woman was either like brunette or like dirty blonde, and one of them was wearing a red sweater and the other was wearing a green sweater. And out of all of those posters, there's only one actress who I could actually say, oh yeah, I know what other work she's done.
I think I found the picture you're talking about on Google. Yeah, and I think that is something that when we get into like the Netflix ones especially, rom-coms are very white. I think Hollywood in general, but especially romantic comedies it's white actress, white actor all the time. And obviously it's getting better. It's not perfect. And I'm hoping that as time progresses, we see more diverse castings in general, especially in romantic comedy movies. But yeah, looking at the Hallmark ones, there's not I see one person of color on this entire Google Images page, so I'd say yeah. But again, they do regurgitate their actors and actresses and put them, it's the same. It feels like the best comparison I can make is like the Disney Channel back in the 2000s, where it was like Brenda Song was in so many damn movies, like all those actresses and actors on the Disney Channel would just go through the combine of just new TV show, new movie. Same kind of thing went for like Nickelodeon for a little while there, where like Janet McCurdy and Ariana Grande got regurgitated into their own show, and then like obviously Miranda Cosgrove went from Drake and Josh to iCarly, and then like I'm sure that like that was the whole thing. And then Cartoon Network really obviously was cartoons, so maybe the voice actors are the same, but those weren't like child actors; those were like grown adults for the most part. So, but yeah, no, like it's that kind of thing where like the actors are, the studio's probably comfortable with that actor, and then vice versa. And I'm sure it's easy. There's chemistry there. It's easy to churn things out. I'm sure that like with the Disney and Nickelodeon cases, it's the director knows the actors know the director. They all work well together. There's chemistry. No one got in controversy yet. Obviously, certain actors and actresses from those channels had their own controversies and all that. Like you look at Vanessa Hudgens had her controversy. Miley Cyrus obviously had her moments. I think Victoria Justice off of Nickelodeon had some stuff, and Ariana Grande started her own career, and a bunch of stuff like that. But I guess it just formulaically it works, and it makes them money, so they just keep churning it out, and that's how Hallmark works.
I will say the biggest event in my childhood that I really think solidified my sense of humor for the rest of my life is the episode of Sweet Life of Zack and Cody where Maddie, London, and the boys' high school puts on a production of High School Musical. And Maddie, who's played by Ashley Tisdale, is like, I want to be Sharpay. Wouldn't I be a perfect Sharpay? And everyone's like, no, you don't even look like her. And she, like, is so passionate about wanting Sharpay, but London gets it instead. And everyone's like, London, you look just like Sharpay. And, oh, God, that was hilarious.
I just recently rewatched Ocean's 12. And there's an exact moment like that where they're like, hey, you look, it's actually Julia Roberts, the actress. And it's like, you look just like Julia Roberts, but she's obviously playing a different character. And it was funny. So that kind of fourth wall break, that was, a little subtle fourth wall break it was cool to see. But yeah, that's another actress I completely forgot about, Ashley Tisdale. And mind you, she hasn't done much since High School Musical.
Yeah.
I want to Google that.
But, she's humble. She doesn't create controversy. That's why she doesn't do anything.
She's a mom now. She's on, like, TikTok.
I have seen her TikToks.
Yeah, she hasn't put, like, anything out since... She was, I guess she was Candace in Phineas and Ferb, and she hasn't done anything since.
Yes, I do remember that.
So...
Which, TV... I mean, I'm sure we've talked about this, but, like, TV is, like, what makes you the most money in the entertainment industry. And so having done, Sweet Life and Sweet Life on Deck and Phineas and Ferb, and then also having all of the royalties, I'm sure, from all the High School Musical series and Sharpay's Fabulous Adventure, like, financially, I'm sure that she is, like, more than set for life.
Oh, for sure.
And at this point, she's, if she works, it's because she wants to. So, anyways, back to the Hallmark Christmas movies. You talked about, you said something interesting. You were like, at this point, these write themselves, which is interesting for you to say going into Netflix movies, because in the case of some of the Netflix rom-coms, they have literally written themselves.
Yeah, I from what I understand, that certain scripts are generated by AI, or at least the preliminary is generated by an AI based on what people like. And I think that Netflix has kind of nailed it in terms of that. I think Netflix has taken a two-pronged approach from what I've noticed, and I think the 2010s kind of had this too, outside of even Netflix, where you have a lot more teen-type rom-coms where it's like late high school or college type, and then you have, like, the adult ones. And I think that with the advent of, like, things like Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, dating apps, basically, and just the accessibility to more humans via social media and all that, where instead of just being your hometown bar, the singles bar or whatever, the world is basically your oyster at this point. And I think that that's kind of where the big cultural shift happened, is where we truly started to embrace technology, and then, like, it took off from there in terms of, like, the whole culture of dating has changed. And so I think you see, like, the teen ones kind of like To All the Boys and Kissing Booth and, like, those ones, whereas like the more adult ones like Holiday, and most recently I think the one I watched was Love Hard, and then you have things like Set It Up and, like, more so like that, where it's, obviously more adult actresses, literal, like, it's an adult type rom-com as opposed to the teen ones. But I think Netflix is definitely, with their, I don't know how much of those are AI generated or not, but they've definitely nailed it in terms of formulaically coming up with interesting movies that are at least worth one watch, if not some of them do have some rewatchability.
And I think because it's interesting you mentioned that about the dating apps, because isn't that the first one that like I had heard about them using AI with was the one with Noah Centineo.
I think you're talking about. Oh, I think it was called Swiped.
I think so as well.
Yeah.
Swiped. Is that the one where he like was different, like people? Looking at it, I think I was
No.
talking about Swiped, but there was
He wasn't
another where
different
he
people.
was.
That one was weird. So, like, the nerd kid codes an app for them that's like super misogynistic, where like
Yeah.
it's like Bumble but reversed, I guess is the way I'd phrase it if I remember right, where it's like the men have all the control. For this, it's an awful movie. Like that one is bad. Like rom-coms can be cheesy. That one was just awful. It wasn't even worth the watch. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. But that one was bad, and
And I realize now the one that I was thinking of before, I had heard about Swiped, and I think they used AI for that. But I know they used AI for The Perfect Date,
interesting.
which is the one where he like changes himself and like puts on a cowboy hat based off of like the woman's preferences. Like he basically tries to be like other people's perfect dates.
That's one of the that's the Laura Morano one. Gotcha. From Austin and Ally.
Austin and Ally. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I remember that one. That one was pretty okay. I'd say I'd say with Netflix too, that's where you're going to see a lot of the same actors and actresses over and over, especially in those teen ones. Because obviously those young actors, young actresses, I'm sure that not a lot of them want to do kind of the romantic comedy kind of shtick. And so Noah Centineo, however you pronounce his last name, he's in a lot of them. I don't know. I don't think he's the greatest actor ever. He's got a very punchable face.
The thing about him is that he gives me very like Grease vibes. Like if he existed, if he was in the Grease movie with like John Travolta and stuff, then I think people would look back on it and be like, oh, he was like so attractive, he's like a classic actor, you know. And like still people are like, you know, people think he's attractive now, but like I don't know, is it bad for me to say that like it's too try-hardy? Like I'm not saying that like he's trying hard, but like I don't know.
I think that's just him.
I
think it's just the fact that he's getting casted so often because he kind of does fit that like bad boy niche, and you see that in all these movies. Is like they try to paint him as a douchebag who actually turns out to be kind of a nice dude. So like that's kind of what literally the plot of To All the Boys I Loved Before. All three of those movies is like, at least the first one is like, this guy's a douchebag, but he's actually kind of nice. And then obviously the next two were like just kill me now. Same with the Kissing Booth movies. Those ones are just, especially To All the Boys. It wasn't bad, and I like to see the representation. Obviously, the main actress being Asian, and like it was still good, and it was sweet, but it wasn't like something I'd watch ever again. Kind of.
Okay, here's my opinions. So I feel like with Noah Centineo, however you pronounce it, I think I figured it out. It's that because maybe I'm just a stubborn person, but because movies are saying like you should be attracted to this. Like don't get me wrong, he is objectively attractive, but like I will like push back against like anything any movie tells me to think. So it's like because he keeps coming up like as a romantic character, I'm like, this is suspicious. But then because like people like Adam Driver, for example, is like, you know, not directly the romantic, you know, interest. He's like, first he's the villain as Kylo Ren, and then he's kind of like, you know, some unsuspecting guy who gets killed in House of Gucci, you know, then it's like, okay, you know, you can be attractive indirectly, and I'm like more comfortable with this. But certainly with the way it's like he's on display in To All the Boys I Loved Before, I mean, maybe that's like, maybe it's trying to like push the female gaze like in combat to the male gaze, like, I mean, this is a longer conversation, but like, there's like complaints, which are real, about like a lot of movies where like female characters are just kind of like only there for like romantic reasons and like as sexual objects. So like, maybe if we make a male version of that, then like, it'll feel like equal or something. But like, I don't know. It just is kind of like jarring for me. I can't explain. I'm staring at his photo on my Google, like dumbfounded, with a loss for words.
I'm going through his filmography right now to see if he's been in anything outside of the Netflix cinematic universe, and he has, but it's like, it's nothing notable.
The Netflix cinematic universe.
I mean, that's kind of what it's turned into at this point, especially those teen movies. It's because he's in all of them. When we talk about actors and actresses,
is he in Kissing Booth?
Okay, not that, but like he's in Perfect Date. He's in To All the Boys. He was in Swiped. His let me Google this again. I think my favorite thing about him, just on a tangent, was when the rumor was spread that he and Grimes were dating. Or were spotted.
I do not remember that
so
rumor.
Someone back when like Grimes and Elon were having their like issues, I guess, with their relationship, Michaela Oakland, I think is her name, on Twitter, posted something that she saw them, Noah and Grimes, at the Olive Garden in like where was it?
The Olive Garden.
No. So the funny thing was, I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere near LA. There's not an Olive Garden there, but people blindly believed her that it actually happened. And here it is. Hang on. Yeah. So yeah, no, people actually like were putting it out there that these two were like sighted together kissing at an Olive Garden, and it was it was so funny. It was just, she was like totally just lying. She just posted it as a tweet and it went viral and people actually believed it. So that was my favorite thing out of him. But I don't know. I feel like he's been in like every freaking like teen rom-com from the past like 5 years. And maybe I'm exaggerating here, but it feels like he just shows up so often. Like,
he's ever present.
Right. And he honestly, like, he reminds me like you could put him in Gossip Girl from like the original Gossip Girl and he'd fit right in terms of the guys in that regard. So I don't know. I think that he's a fine actor, I guess. It's just, it's the recurrence that it gets irritating, I guess.
Yes. I think that's exactly it. Because certainly I watched the first two All the Boys I've Loved Before. And we'll talk about it, but I loved it. And it was like, oh, you're a good actor. Oh, yeah, I like your character. Aw, I'm glad she ended up with you. Okay. And then it's just like, you again. Or like, first it's like, oh, hello, you again. Then it's like, oh, you again here. Oh, now you're showing up, it like there's that, what's that YouTube video of him that's like, And
before I go, I just want to say it matters not what you've done, but what you do with what you've done for others. Thank you.
And then I see all this other like Twitter beef and stuff from him. So now I'm like, okay, like why is this guy everywhere? But I love To All the Boys I Loved Before. I think that, and we've talked about this, because in high school, Kissing Booth came out, and there were a lot of people who liked it, and people would say to me, like, oh, yeah, I loved Kissing Booth, go watch it. And I'm like, really? Think about me, because I am not one who likes teen dramas. I was really so-so on Glee, like, I enjoyed the music and all, but, like, I don't like the pettiness. I don't like, and even with To All the Boys I've Loved Before, Part 2, where they're like, oh my God, you didn't wear my jersey on game day. How dare you, babe? I'm like, really? Like, I don't want to watch this. What are these rules? What are these standards for a relationship? But like, because To All the Boys I've Loved Before was kind of like about a girl who had never had a relationship, and so, but like now her younger sister is like forcing her to like kind of share her feelings and just suddenly out her, and she has like all this drama, I was pulled in. I thought it was compellingly different than other stories about high school relationships. But of course, as I said, in the second one, that's when it, is like, OMG, you texted my ex-girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, ew.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of formulaically those teen movies have that issue where it turns into either multiple women competing for one dude or vice versa. And it can be done tastefully, but like at a certain point, it just turns into crap. I think obviously, what still cracks me up to this day is the shift of the character, like the new character in All the Boys 2, where he went from being white in the first movie to being black in the second movie.
Oh my God, yeah.
That still cracks me up to this day. But obviously, like, and that's the plot of like all those movies. And I'm sure that, again, it's worth one watch. They're sweet movies. They're endearing, but. I think that in terms of like, they're safe too is the issue, and obviously with the teen one you can't go anything other than safe because obviously they're children in the movie in theory, and so you can't really push too much of like a narrative of like anything that isn't appropriate for good reason. Obviously they're children in theory, so. I don't know. The teen ones that Netflix has been putting out are decent, but again, same actors. I thought The Kissing Booth was bad. I think I watched the second one, and I can't get myself to watch the third one. I need to one of these days, but like, the first.
There's a third?
There's 3, I think. Yeah.
Oh my God.
The first one was it was weird to me because the stereotypical plot with that kind of movie. I think I've mentioned this to you before. Is like she's in love with some dude. The dude turns out to be bad, and the best friend who's been supporting her all along has actually been in love with her. And they realize it, and they go off together. But no, she actually ends up.
That's literally the plot of the Barbie High School Diaries.
It's a classic trope, and it works. And like, but like this one, it's like she's in love with the older brother, and then actually ends up with the older brother. And it's like the dude's above high school age, and she's like still in high school, and like it's weird. I don't know. I just didn't vibe with it. I thought it was kind of just a crappy movie. I mean, worth one watch maybe, but it wasn't like a rewatchable like classic by any means. I think that Netflix's adult rom-coms are doing a lot better because they just don't have the same limitations, and obviously like the I'd say the plots are more relatable. I'm thinking like here like I thought Set It Up was fantastic. I thought Holidays was pretty good. Love Hard was pretty good. I thought one that is like super worth a watch is Always Be My Maybe.
That is the one. I hadn't heard of any of the other ones you said, but I have Always Be My Maybe on my list
That
with
one
Ali
is
Wong.
fantastic. Like it's based in San Francisco, so there's some homage because we're both from there. But like it was really good in my opinion, and like that, I think that the adult ones are better, and then they're also obviously that one is it's like pretty much an all Asian cast, so that one was obviously pretty good, and then on top of it, I think they've just kind of nailed it down to where it's just the right amount of like for lack of a better word, raunchy, and it hits all the buttons. The plot's good. The twist is obviously typically just. You go into it, it's worth the watch, and then you obviously know it ends happily. So it's easy to watch, you miss 10 minutes, it's whatever. And I think that, obviously as a society we've moved forward, and they're more relatable to the modern day because of just the topics that are involved in them typically, or you can be like, oh yeah, I get that. So yeah.
That's good. So looks like I will have to watch Always Be My Maybe then.
Yeah, that one's fantastic for sure.
And that's one I understand is like they were friends for a long time and then they get together. And because you mentioned friends to lovers, and that is a common rom-com trope.
Yes.
So what are some of your least favorite tropes? Let's talk about it.
I mean, there's the friends to lovers trope. There was the trope that we were talking about earlier with doesn't realize they're in love, but actually realizes that the person they love's right there type trope. And then I think most of the tropes come down to like that twist in the movie, and most of the time it's like person A does something stupid that pisses off, person B. Person B gets mad, and then in reality they end up happily ever after. And I think most of the time it's some variation on like, oops, I think you're cheating on me, or I'm moving across the country, or something to obviously break the relationship up. And while I don't know if that fits into a classic trope, because 9 times out of 10 that's kind of what differs the movies, is that twist. Obviously, the character's different, the setting's different, the actors are typically different, but for the most part it's the same overarching theme. And so I don't know. I guess I can't really put a name to a lot of those tropes, but I'm sure that there is a word for them. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. There's also the idea of contrived romantic encounters, often termed meet cutes. That's how I saw it on Wikipedia. Like the idea, like, I don't know if you've seen Sleepless in Seattle, but it's like they meet because it's Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. Tom Hanks' son calls into a radio show and says, "Hey, my mom died and my dad is sad. Could I get a new mom? Is there anyone out there listening who'd like to be my mom?" And Meg Ryan is like, "Oh, that's so sweet," and like calls into Tom Hanks's house, or like writes a letter. Something like that. And so that's, again, something that's very like, they weren't friends before, they didn't work together before. It's just very like contrived. And in the 90s, when they didn't have the dating apps, it's like, how else are you going to meet someone who like you have no clue who they are and they're not even from your hometown?
Right. And I think that, like, obviously the tropes at its core, it's the same thing. Like, but obviously more modernized. And so, like, you haven't seen a lot of the Netflix ones, so, and I don't really want to ruin anything, but like a lot of them do kind of revolve around that. There's a few with the dating apps. There's a few just with like, I don't know. Typically it's just happy accident type things, where that like they meet because of whatever, and that's part of the plot. And then they realize, hey, we have chemistry, part of the plot. And then, they're like, hey, let's be more than just whatever they were before. And then one of them messes up, and then they realize that mess up wasn't that big of a deal, and then they all live happily ever after. And so, I don't know. I think that's just a general formula, maybe not a trope, but I think that obviously throughout history, time, whatever, that's kind of just the typical romantic comedy. And like, there's obviously spin-offs, and there's some movies where you might consider it a rom-com, you might not. Like, one comes to mind maybe is like, obviously if it's like a romantic subplot, but not really. So like maybe like Pitch Perfect was that really like it was a combination like a coming of age movie in a way, but also like like there's obviously a romantic undertone with a couple of the like relationships there and stuff like that. So so I'm sure that the trope is a very overarching theme with obviously some very specific, like, you could say this, you could compare 2 movies to each other and they'd have the same exact plot with like, just a tad bit of difference.
Different big city, different, firm job that the woman works for, different coffee shop that they run into each other in. Right.
And then different reason why they end up not breaking up initially but getting back together. Like it all kind of boils down to you could probably just kind of put it in its own bucket of movies, and I guess that's kind of why like rom-coms are pretty broad in that regard.
Well, and it's interesting that you say Pitch Perfect, because Rebel Wilson from Pitch Perfect was the lead in Isn't It Romantic with was it Liam Hemsworth who was in the movie? It was Liam Hemsworth and Isn't It Romantic from 2019. It was with Liam Hemsworth, Adam Devine, and Priyanka Chopra. And the great thing about that movie is that really, like, picks out and picks apart the rom-com tropes. Part of which to, like, make fun of it, where she's like, why is everybody singing? Why are there flowers everywhere? What the heck? I live in New York, but this is, you know, such a beautiful street that does, you know, not look at all like New York. Like, she points out the fact that, like, her life has been romanticized. And even, like, the first scene, like, talks about the, you know, we talked about the standards of beauty in, like, older rom-coms, in that it's often very white, straight, cis, skinny people, you know, and so there's just, like, this movie, like, is, like, trying to break apart from that. And the, like, beautiful, not, like, the beautiful girl that, like, Rebel Wilson is, like, competing with, but, like, she's, like, the one that, like, she's worried about. There's often in rom-coms, like, the other woman that the protagonist is like, oh my god, she's so pretty, am I competing with her? But then by the end of the movie, it's like, no, I never compete with another woman. Girl power. And so in this movie, that that actress is Priyanka Chopra, who obviously is stunning. But yeah, and so if you know, if you as a listener want to see some of these tropes more called out in action, I would recommend Isn't It Romantic?
And I think that the Netflix ones also have that tinge of self-awareness to them. And I think we see a lot more recently, especially like fourth wall breaks in that regard, in terms of, like, they are self-aware sometimes. And sometimes they aren't. But, like, I think the most recent one I'm thinking of is, like, Love Hard, which I watched. That came out last year. Well, I say last year, like last December, so, like, not that long ago. But I guess if this December 2021, just in case someone's listening to this way later in the year. But so pretty much that one, I believe, had a couple of fourth wall breaks where it was like, well, this feels like the stereotypical rom-com, and, like, you know, this and this happens, and, like, you know, there's that little bit of, like, the glimmer of self-awareness, but I don't think it's to the same degree of, like, it's self-aware that it is the stereotype rather than, like, making fun of the stereotype. It's more the stereotype of the trope rather than the fact that, like, it is, like, skinny, white, cisgendered, straight couple type thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, and it's partially probably my fault, but I can't really name a non-straight rom-com other than, like,
Simon.
or at least exclusively. Because, like, there's sometimes there'll be rom-coms where it's like 5 couples, and so, like, the gay couple, or, like, you know, anywhere on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum couple, typically isn't the main couple, or they are coupled with 3 or 4 others. And I'm not sure if that's just, obviously there's probably lack of representation, but it's also partially, like, I think that the companies that are making these rom-coms, they want to appeal to relatability. And I think that, like, while we as a society have moved forward, would still be jarring for a lot of viewers, and I'm sure it would be controversial to some, and companies don't, you know, want to avoid that. And I'd love to see more of those kind of movies, and I'm sure we will see more of those kind of movies going forward. But yeah, it is truly just, it falls into that, I guess, that trope of, and not trope, but just kind of what it is of just straight couples.
Yeah. There's certainly the idea that, like, rom-coms have been sold to straight couples for decades because it's been pretty much all straight couples in them. And movies just, like, about, you know, the queer experience and stuff have often been, like, a lot of dramas with, like, you know, Moonlight and, like, even Rebel Without a Cause. And because obviously for so many years, because of the Hays Code, if you were, like, gay in a movie, the character had to die by the end. So, you know, there's not a lot of, like, happy movies about being a gay person. And so then the rom-com producers are like, oh, well, you know, we're always selling rom-coms to straight people, so why would we make rom-coms for gay people? Because, you know, that's not our audience. Though the reality is, you know, most likely that if you did make rom-coms, you know, for non-straight people, then they'd show up. Your audience would expand.
Yeah, I think the audience would expand, but I think also like it would take a writer, director, whatever, who is of that kind of within that group to make a good one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of like writers and directors and, you know, media owners or whatever are probably straight people.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that just based off what I've seen, obviously I have no experience, but like straight relationships versus like non-straight relationships are drastically different in terms of like, I guess the style, the lifestyle, like how the dating works and the romance and all that kind of thing. And obviously romance at the end of the day is romance, but I think it wouldn't be a standard rom-com, that's for sure. Obviously, and that's just and so there was one movie, God, on Netflix. It was an original and it was good. See if I can find it. All right, I'm gonna give up so that it doesn't just sound like silence for too long. But there was one movie on Netflix. I can't remember. I watched it a while ago, but like I think there was. I think it tastefully did it, if I remember correctly. There was a lesbian couple, and so I think it worked. And I'm sure that we'll see more of it. I think it's just the obvious rom-coms sell because of their relatability, and obviously the most related, like the largest audience right now is going to be straight people. So I'm sure that companies, because money is still a huge part of Hollywood, it's not the art, it's the money. I'm sure that a lot of it is going to be straight couples for quite a while. But yeah.
So, you know, we've talked about the idea of relating yourself to the characters and to the couples. Do you ever insert yourself into these movie characters? Do you ever think like, oh, if I was him, I would do this. If I was her, I would do that?
Not really. I don't think there's, when you're watching the movies, it's like there's not much depth to them. Obviously, they're meant to be kind of surface level and shallow in that regard, and they're meant to just be easy, basic watch. So you kind of just like, obviously, in the same way that horror movie characters are stupid, like, you know, people are stupid. Like, I guess I'll cringe a little sometimes when it's like, okay, that was dumb, but I never put myself in their shoes. I guess it's just kind of like, because you as the audience have more knowledge than the character in the movie, you might cringe and be like, well, you're an idiot, but you know, it all works out. But so I don't think I really put myself in their shoes. No.
Do you believe love is real? After watching all the rom-coms you have,
Yeah, I mean,
how has it affected
but,
your view on love?
I mean, it's real, but I don't think that like a rom-com is what love is. Like, that's obviously just textbook on paper, like, you know, perfect, you know, suburb picket fence type stuff. Like, it's not realistic. Especially, you know, on the vein of things like Hallmark movies are not realistic whatsoever. I mean, let's be real. But, you know, people might fantasize about or romanticize that kind of stuff, but it's not realistic. And I think that there are some that do kind of approach reality and do and I think that's kind of, we see more and more of the ones that were made recently, you can kind of relate to more so and be like, yeah, that's realistic in a way. Especially with like the dating app stories, because it is more relatable, and it's not as much as like a the perfect situation type scenarios oftentimes. But for the most part, I don't think they're like super applicable to real life. I think they're obviously meant to be an escapist kind of like like a fantasy almost, where it's, you know, you can
Yeah.
kind of zone yourself out for an hour and a half or however long the movie is and just kind of you know, lose it in their world, I guess, rather than thinking about the cold harsh reality of the real world.
I definitely think that as much as I said earlier, I really like Drew Barrymore, and so then when I watch Ever After, I feel, not that like I feel like I am her character, you know, but it's like I wish I was, just because it's fun, but certainly it's hard to like connect anything that happens in terms of like those relationships in those movies with like me and the like relationships I see happening among people my age. And I think that like it has affected me in that, you know, obviously like I do believe in like love being important to like relationships and marriages, and you know, I'm someone who like I think strives for romance before striving for like a boyfriend to have. Whereas, like, you know, in high school, some people would just, like, you know, pair up for the sake of pairing up because it was something they felt like they needed to do, you know. And so I think that, like, that's how that's affected me. But, like, at the same time, you know, no one's hopping on a motorcycle to, like, object at the altar of my wedding, you know. No one is, like, spilling coffee on me on a random, you know, Wednesday in the coffee shop and being like, oh, I'm sorry I spilled coffee on you. Can I get your number? You know, and so a lot of just like the way that these relationships start and then even how they carry on just like doesn't reflect things I see or things that have happened to me or other people. And so as much as it has like instilled like the value of romance, whereas like, you know, and obviously we're a culture, our Western like American culture values romance in a way that other countries with like arranged marriages, or even marriages where the woman goes, yes, I will get married for money only. I do not love this man, but I am fine marrying him for money. You know, we're unique in that we value romance, and I don't know what countries do and what countries don't exactly. But so I think it's had that influence on me, but I certainly can't say it's taught me like how to interact with, you know, people I'm interested in, how to like carry on a relationship, flirt, etc.
Yeah, and the relationships in those movies are often like the chemistry is like obviously surface level. It's typically just like two attractive people getting together. Yeah, as you said in high school, it's just two people getting together for the sake of getting together. Most of the time, it is that. And you know it works. It's a, you know, when it's just there's no you don't really attach yourself to the characters. It's just you know, there's a happy ending, and that's kind of it's easy to watch because of that. You know, there's not going to be it resolves. It's always, you know, it's easy to watch because at the end of the day, it's just it's happy. So, whereas obviously a real relationship like beyond that needs to have, you know, appearance-based relationships is like it's very Hollywood. It's not realistic.
Yeah.
Like there has to be some level of chemistry there where you can actually put up with each other for, you know, more than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's definitely
Yeah.
not portrayed in the movies most of the time.
Yeah.
And there's even
certainly,
a trope for that in terms of like the married couple, not necessarily rom-com, but like the whole they're you know, they're falling out of love with each other, but then realize that they're actually meant for, like, you know, there's something beyond it. It's just they're annoyed at each other, and so there's obviously that kind of genre, but for the most part, it's just surface level, like, you know, physical attraction type stuff.
yeah. And I think that the movies that like convince me more are the ones that like show the characters have similar values. Like, I think that was a good thing about The Proposal with Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds is they seem so different. And because it is like an enemies to lovers type of thing, she's like, you know, his boss who's tyrannical, and he's the personal assistant who, you know, is trying really hard to get the promotion. And like, you think that like they would hate being a couple together, but like she meets his family and she realizes, oh, my values kind of align with his and I could really fit well into his life, you know, and we could be happy together. And so the movies that like do that work of like sifting out their similar like values and conveniences and life structure helps. But then when you don't get that in the movie, that's kind of like invisible work. And so then when you don't have that and you have all the attraction, then, you know, you as an audience member, like, maybe you feel it, maybe you don't. Like, one of my biggest complaints about The Princess Diaries 2, I love The Princess Diaries and I love The Princess Diaries 2, but I never thought Chris Pine's character, I forgot his name, I never thought he was good enough for Anne Hathaway's character. You know, like, they had fun moments. They, like, you know, kissed in the garden. They had that, like, you know, picnic in the moonlight, whatever. But, like, they didn't, like, talk about values. Like, their relationship was, it's kind of, you know, it's actually kind of scandalous and like kind of nothing at all, but like supposedly there's a romance there. And so unless you yourself like feel so attracted to, and like obviously he's like objectively an attractive guy, like duh, but like I could not, the supposed connection between Chris Pine and Anne Hathaway was not enough for me to overlook the fact that, you know, he was in line for her throne and his uncle was the villain, and this relationship is actually kind of BS.
And I think that's kind of what defines the rewatchable ones versus the not rewatchable ones, is if that development happens in the plot where like you actually see the characters grow closer together and like actually like, you know, it's not just skipping around and stuff. Like one that I think I've told you to watch before, Little Italy with Hayden Christensen and Emma Roberts. The first time I watched it, because I rewatched it recently, and for whatever reason I thought it had more plot to it. I thought it was a longer movie, and I think that's one thing that the rom-com genre, I keep saying an hour and a half because that's like the almost ideal length. Most rom-coms are about that, right? And so it's not going to occupy too much of your time. If it's a bad movie, you know, you only wasted 90 minutes. But sometimes it's a decent movie for most of it. And if it had maybe like another 15 minutes of runtime, 30 minutes of runtime, like they could have developed the plot a lot better and it made it more relatable. Then Little Italy is still pretty good, honestly. It's still worth the watch. But like I think that's where,
despite the fact that Hayden Christensen is, you know, he's Dutch man.
No, he's Italian on his mom's side, but
not Italian enough. He's a Metagon.
Pretty sure Emma Roberts isn't Italian either, so whatever. I'm pretty sure none of the actors and actresses in that were Italian. Maybe well,
I mean, Emma Roberts is Hawaiian, obviously.
Is that a joke I'm not getting?
That's a joke for that Aloha movie she was in.
Oh God, just like Scarlett Johansson and the Ghost in the Shell. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I think that like having that plot develop and having the relationship develop and like is key to making it both rewatchable and just like good in general. And like that's I think that comes down to like the writer, especially, is like how granular, how detailed you need to get into their lives and like into their connection, and like how far can you skip ahead, how much time can you like say occurred in between this and that type thing, to and still make it connect and still make it feel like those characters. You have to make the characters matter to the person watching, and I think a lot of like rom-coms do fall short in that regard, to where you don't feel that connection. You just like, oh, two attractive people. like want to get together type thing, as opposed to like actual like deep connection as to why their relationship makes sense and like how they have chemistry.
Okay, so this brings us to our final segment of the podcast. I know you've been waiting for it.
Convince Chad.
So imagine this, Scanlon. You're standing in the parking lot of your local Georgia grocery store, and 3 country boys pull up in their pickup truck. They hop out with their cowboy hats and jean jackets, and you hear them all be like, "You heard Netflix is making a 4th movie for To All the Boys I've Loved Before? That's so dumb. I hate rom-coms." And you take off your cowboy hat and you throw it towards them like a frisbee. And guess what? It scratches their truck. And they turn to you like, and you say, "Listen here, partners. You're wrong about rom-coms. They're phenomenal." And now, in Chad's own language, you must convince them why rom-coms are so fun. Please use the voice.
Yeah. I guess you just gotta convince them that like to just go get some, go buy some weed, get high as fuck, and then just watch them while high, and it's an experience, I guess. I don't know. They're easy to watch. They're not long typically, and at the end of the day, it's always a happy ending. So you don't have to worry about it. Typically, it's attractive people, so your eyes aren't gonna be sore, and I don't know.
Well, that was all for this episode. Thank you very much, and see you next time.